I would like to acknowledge that this video is being filmed on the traditional lands of the Wurrundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people who may be watching this video today. Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Books Beside My Bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This reading week happens to include the Dark Romance Readathon, which I have a completely separate vlog for, so I'm not going to be talking about any of those books in this video, but I will leave it linked on the screen for you if you would like to check it out. I did read 9 books for that video, so there's a ton of books that I talk about. Sorry if the camera angle changed, I'm having some issues with my tripod today. Anyway, moving on. This is my reading week from the 19th until the 22nd of April. I read 8 things and that equated to 2,572 pages, and my yearly reading total is 185 books. So after the Dark Romance Readathon finished over the weekend, I decided to take a brief break from reading romance books, and I picked up one of the books on my TBR cart, which is The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky. This is the 4th and final book in the Wayfarer series, and this is a series that I absolutely love, and I also think it's probably a great sci-fi series that is set in space with aliens and all of that stuff for people who aren't science fiction readers, because Becky writes about characters and personalities and relationships and how that all intermingles, but it's set in space. So if you like character dynamics and you like conversations and you like characters who explore different ideas in depth, these are the books to check out. And I'm so sad that the Wayfarer series is completed because I just adore this world. So The Galaxy and the Ground Within is basically set on this way station planet. So it's kind of like that stopover planet before you can move on to your next destination, because in this series, in order to travel through space, you have tunnels that are punched through space. So no one causes accidents, you know, they're heavily regulated and you have times that you have to travel through them and whatnot. And this little way station planet happens to sit near a whole, it's kind of like a highway for interstellar travel. On this little planet, which had no life prior to it sort of being this hub for this space highway, little pockets of people have set up these, you know, little places where people can park and come down and just relax and eat some food, and they've got gift stores, and you know, they can pick up some basic supplies and do basic repairs and that sort of stuff. We meet Ulu, who runs one of these stations, and she's there with her child. She is a really consummate host. She always wants to know more about the people that she is there to support and help. And then she has 3 sets of visitors on this particular day, and then something major happens and all travel is halted in this area of space, and so her guests are stranded. And they all have different things that they're traveling towards. They all have different time limits on when they need to get there. And so this adds to their stress, but also to them eventually connecting with one another. One of the characters, Pei, is a character we have met briefly in A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, I believe. I can't remember. I have to go back and reread that book. It's been ages since I've read it. The second character is Rovag, who is an artist in exile from his home system. And you also have Speaker, who is from a race that nobody really knows a huge amount about, but people have these preconceived notions about them. And so they treat her race very differently. And she is from a race that doesn't breathe oxygen, so she has to spend the entire time that she's on planet with everyone encased in a suit, which makes her even more inaccessible, you would think. And it's about how all of these people get to know one another, how they deal with some of the prejudices that they have, how they cope with being stranded here, and honestly, it's just gorgeous. Highly, highly recommend. After that, I decided to finish off the duet that I started in the Dark Romance Readathon. So I read Corrado by Bethany-Kris, and so I decided to finish off reading Alessio, which is the second and concluding book in that particular story arc, which is an MMF dark romance story about Canadian mafia. The whole premise of this series is that Corrado and Alessio met when they were teenagers and they were being trained as assassins and spies and whatnot. And for years they've had this very kind of tumultuous relationship, like they're dedicated to one another, but they're not exclusive to one another either. They have sort of these rules on their relationship, but they also can't talk about it or confirm it because of Corrado's position as the son of the head of the Canadian mafia, and you know, being gay is an issue. So their relationship is up and down, and then Corrado meets Ginevra, and he's tasked with spiriting her away and keeping her out of sight from New York because of some business that's going on down there. And he ends up falling for her, and Alessio finds out, and that's the plot of the first book. And in Alessio, it's about how the three of them come to grips with their relationship, because Alessio then begins to have feelings for Ginevra as well. So their relationship becomes more complex and they have to navigate a whole lot more things. They have some huge miscommunications, and Corrado having to deal with being open and admitting his relationship with Alessio. And honestly, it was just really interesting. I really like the character dynamics and I really like the characters. So that was great. And then I followed that up by reading the third book in the series, Chris. Now, Chris is Corrado's twin brother. He was also trained at this assassin spy school, but he really hasn't done anything with that. He's gone back into the mafia. He is a made man and he is happy doing that. But he takes on this mission on behalf of Corrado so his brother doesn't have to do it, and he goes down to Mexico to find out information about a woman who is the wife of a leader of one of the biggest cartels down there. Her friends think that she has been kidnapped and taken there against her will, and we find out that when she was 16 years old, she was married to this leader of the cartel against her will. She ended up pregnant and she escaped from him before the baby was born. Now flash forward 6 or 7 years later and he has kidnapped her back because he can't let that slide. Chris ends up embedded in this cartel under the guise of doing a deal with the Canadian mafia, and he's trying to scope out exactly how he can get Val out of this situation, as well as her daughter. Normally I'm not a kids in book person, but I really liked Maria in this. She was a really adorable 6-year-old character. She felt like a 6-year-old. And I liked the difference between Corrado and Chris that we get to see, because we meet Chris quite a bit in the original duet, but to see him get his own book was fantastic. Then I did my reread of the new Camelot series. So American Queen, American Prince, and American King. And these are ginormous chunky books by Sierra Simone. I started reading it for the first time in I want to say 2019 and 2020. So I just did a reread back to back of reading them. I'm kind of torn between saying, yes, definitely read them back to back in a 24-hour period, and no, don't do that, because it's a bit like when I did the Green Creek reread and I ended up a little bit emotional by the end of it. This is an MMF dark romance series. It is the throuple relationship between the American president, his vice president, and the president's wife. And it is an Arthurian legend retelling. Sierra Simone has some really interesting author's notes at the end where she talked about the research she did, and you have characters based on Guinevere and Arthur, but you also have the third character, who is the vice president, Embry, who is a mashup of Lancelot and Mordred based on sort of the ideas that Sierra Simone was exploring, which I think is really fascinating. The first book is told primarily through Greer, the female protagonist's perspective, and she meets Ash, who is the president, when she's very, very young. And I think he's only 16, and they have this chance encounter. He's 10 years older than her, he's a soldier, and he meets her at this dinner that they've both attended with other people. And ever since then, she has not been able to forget this encounter. But she has been warned off by a character called Merlin Reese, who is an advisor, to keep her kisses to herself and to stay clear of people lest she set things in motion. And she doesn't really understand what this means. Flash forward, she's now in her early 20s and she's a lecturer. She lectures on ancient history, and Vice President Embry Moore turns up in her office and tells her that Ash would like to see her. What we find out is that they have their own history, and it becomes incredibly complex because Ash and Embry have been in a relationship. Ash and Greer have this connection, but Greer and Embry also have this connection, and the three of them come to realize that what they have together is pretty much explosive. But what I hear a lot of people talk about with this series, because I'm not going to talk about it in any more depth than that because honestly that just gets into spoiler territory, is that American Queen is fantastic, and there are some scenes in here that just blow your mind. But the second book really let people down, which happens to be Embry's book. And I think I came to a conclusion why I think that is, because we really we're introduced to the series through Greer's point of view, and I think that's really important because she's sort of this linchpin between these two men. However, it's actually Ash and Embry's relationship that I think everything spins on, and the way that they interact with one another. And there's a lot of betrayal and things in here, and I'll talk about some content warnings in a moment. It's almost like you really need American Queen and American Prince to be told at exactly the same time, and somehow you need to be able to read both those stories, because what we don't get in the first book is Ash and Embry's story. And I think there's a slight disconnect in the way in the timing of when we find things out and whose perspective we find them out from, which possibly lets down book 2. Now, there's also some scenes in book 2 that involve consensual non-consent. So I'm going to put spoilers on the screen. Please skip until the end of spoilers. I'll even have it timestamped down below so you can just skip the whole timestamp. There is a scene at the very start of book 2 because Greer has been kidnapped and Embry is the one who's sent after her to collect her. She has spent the whole time fearing that she is going to be raped and she can't leave until Embry sleeps with her. And what she wants is for it to feel like she's out of control, because in her head she admits it doesn't make sense, it sounds totally crazy, but that's what she needs in that moment. And he feels an incredible amount of guilt around it, but also it turns him on. So I think that's one of the scenes that unsettle people, plus the way that you have Embry blowing really hot and cold in his relationship with Ash. The other thing I want to mention, there are 2 content warnings in this book. One is for the drugging and rape of a man at the end of book 2, and also there is a suicide on page in book 3. So be aware of that going into it. Otherwise, I really enjoy these characters and their interplay because I think they're deeply, deeply fascinating. They're very complex in the way that they think. For all the things that Embry does throughout the series, he's still my favorite character in the series because I think he's working through a lot and I think he has to process a lot in the series. But that said, when I got to book 3, which is told most predominantly initially through Ash's perspective as well, that was probably the one I got most emotional in because a lot of things are seemingly out of his control. So I don't know if that made any sense, but I really enjoy this series. Okay, and then the last 2 books are part of the 5-pack series by Cate C Wells. The Heir Apparent's Rejected Mate came out on Friday, and I happened to see just before then that she had a short story in her Facebook group that she was getting people to beta read. So anyway, I grabbed it, and this one is called Derwyn's Rejected Mate. This is set in the same pack, the Moonlake pack that we meet in the second book, and it's just a really quick story between Derwyn, who happens to be sort of a lieutenant to the Heir Apparent, and one of the scavenger females called Enid. So it'll probably make more sense if you read it after the Heir Apparent's Rejected Mate, but I happened to read it beforehand and it just got me excited to get into this new book. So then I read the Heir Apparent's Rejected Mate, which is the second book in the 5-pack series. This one, both characters are 18 years old, so I didn't realise that when I was going into it because I don't read synopsises and I don't typically read new adulty type things. Although that said, partway through the book it stopped feeling like that, so that didn't bother me as much. This one is also a super slow burn and people may not necessarily be happy with the amount of grovelling that Cate does. He's the hero in this book and that's totally fine, but I had the emotional payoff that I wanted by the end of the book, so I was happy. The story is about Cate, who is the Heir Apparent for the Moonlake pack, and their pack is quite split. You've got half the pack who are, working very much in the human world. They're trying to present this face to the humans that, there's wealth here and that they know exactly what's going on and that they can interact with humans at their level and that they're not a threat. They also have the part of the pack, mostly the ones that they call the scavengers, who are not really comfortable in the human world and they prefer to live in their little community and they don't want to interact with humans or any of that. They don't have any interest. And so they're sort of the low of the low and they're treated as such by sort of the higher ranking wolves in the pack. While Cate is tapped to become the new alpha, he ends up having fate intervene because his mate is revealed to be Rosie and she's a scavenger, which is a problem for his position in the pack because no one will respect that. And so he goes about not acknowledging that, which is really hard because as soon as they recognize each other as their mates, their body starts going through different changes. Rosie starts going into heat, which is really uncomfortable for her. And there's a lot of push and pull. And of course, Rosie ends up being really severely bullied by some of the other female wolves who just have absolutely zero respect for the scavengers. So there's a lot of that stuff going on in the book, so beware of that. Rosie is a very quietly confident character. Like, she doesn't let what other people say, for the most part, get her down. There is one scene that is sort of her breaking point, which is sort of at the 3/4 mark of the book, where she finally just cracks and loses it and leaves. But for the most part, she's quietly confident. She's content to ignore those people because she knows that they won't change. She hopes that Cate will, but she also, time and time again, has proven that he's not going to accept her as his mate because of his responsibilities. So a lot of what's happening is him having to figure out that perhaps what he stands for is not what he wants, and also Rosie finding the courage to do what is right for her. So in that sense, I really liked the story. That is the end of this week's wrap up. In the comments, I would love to know if you have read any of these books or if you're planning on picking them up. Alternatively, feel free to share something that you have been reading, or if you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a rocket ship emoji down below. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.